The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the asphalt into a mirror that reflected every streetlight like broken glass. Each droplet hit the windshield of my beat-up Honda with the persistence of bullets, and the wipers couldn't keep up with the deluge. The storm had been building all day, the kind of Chicago weather that made even the most hardened residents retreat indoors. Thunder rolled across the sky like God himself was rearranging furniture, and lightning split the darkness in jagged, electric scars. I should have been home an hour ago, but the emergency room had been absolute chaos. 3 car accidents from the weather, 2 overdoses from the usual suspects seeking shelter from their demons, and a heart attack that kept us running code blues until well past my shift. My royal blue scrubs were still damp with sweat and stained with coffee from the machine that barely worked, clinging to my exhausted body like a second skin. The fabric felt heavy against my shoulders, weighted down by the humidity and the emotional toll of saving lives for 12 straight hours. All I wanted was to collapse into my tiny third-floor walk-up apartment, peel off these scrubs, and forget that today ever happened. Maybe order Chinese takeout from the place down the street that knew my voice by now, eat it straight from the container while binge-watching something mindless on Netflix. My feet ached in my white nursing shoes, the kind designed for comfort but failing miserably after 14 hours of running between trauma bays and intensive care units. The radio had been warning about flash floods all evening, advising people to stay off the roads unless absolutely necessary. But nurses didn't get the luxury of calling in sick because of weather. People still needed saving, regardless of what Mother Nature had planned. So here I was, white-knuckling my steering wheel and trying to see through a windshield that looked like it was being attacked by a pressure washer, just trying to make it home in one piece. That's when I saw him. The motorcycle was twisted around a lamppost like a metal sculpture created by some deranged artist, steam rising from its engine like a dying breath. Chrome and black metal were scattered across the wet pavement, pieces of what had once been a beautiful machine now reduced to expensive debris. The bike itself looked like it had cost more than I made in 6 months at Ducati. Sleek and powerful, the kind of machine that purred like a predator when it was running. Now it hissed and steamed like a wounded animal, its headlight shattered, oil mixing with rainwater to create rainbow slicks across the asphalt. But it wasn't the destroyed motorcycle that made me slam on my brakes. The man lay motionless on the rain-soaked pavement about 10 feet from the wreckage, dark hair plastered to his skull like wet ink, blood mixing with the water that pooled around his head in pink rivulets. He was massive, even unconscious and broken. I could see the powerful build beneath his leather jacket. His body was positioned at an unnatural angle, one arm clearly bent wrong. His expensive leather jacket torn at the shoulder to reveal what looked like a pristine white dress shirt underneath, now stained with rain and blood. My nursing instincts kicked in before my common sense could protest. I pulled over, hazard lights flashing like a beacon in the storm, and grabbed my small medical kit from the back seat, the one I always carried, old habits from nursing school when we were taught to be prepared for anything. The rain hit me like a cold slap as soon as I opened the car door, instantly soaking through my scrubs and plastering my blonde hair to my head. Within seconds, I was as drenched as if I'd jumped into Lake Michigan. Racing toward him, my shoes slipped on the wet pavement and I nearly went down twice. The storm was deafening rain hitting the ground like applause, thunder rolling overhead like a freight train, the hiss of steam from the destroyed motorcycle adding to the symphony of destruction. Streetlights created pools of yellow light in the darkness, making the scene look like something from a movie, surreal and dramatic. He was massive, even unconscious and broken. I could see the powerful build beneath his leather jacket. His face was carved from marble, all sharp angles and strong lines, with a jaw that could cut glass and cheekbones that belonged in a Renaissance painting. There was something almost ethereal about him lying there in the rain, like a fallen angel cast down from heaven, beautiful and terrible and completely vulnerable. Even in his current state, everything about him screamed money and power. The leather jacket was buttery soft and perfectly tailored, probably Italian and worth more than my monthly rent. His jeans were dark and expensive, fitted to his long legs like they'd been made for him specifically. Even his boots were beautiful black leather that had been lovingly cared for, the kind of footwear that cost more than most people's car payments. I knelt beside him, my knees immediately soaked through to the skin as cold rainwater seeped through my scrubs. His pulse was weak but steady when I pressed my fingers to his neck, and his breathing was shallow but regular, good signs, but he was definitely in trouble. A head wound was bleeding freely, crimson mixing with the rain to create pink streams down his temple. I could see his left arm was definitely broken, bent at an angle that made my stomach clench with sympathy pain. But he was alive, barely. My hands moved automatically, checking for spinal injuries, looking for signs of internal bleeding, cataloging his injuries with the clinical efficiency that had been drilled into me through years of emergency medicine. Possible concussion from the head wound, definitely a broken ulna in his left arm. Road rash on his hands and what I could see of his arms. But miraculously, nothing that looked immediately life-threatening if I could get him help quickly. "Can you hear me?" I whispered, checking his pupils with my phone's flashlight. The left pupil was slightly larger than the right, not good, but not immediately dangerous either. No response to my voice, but his eyelids fluttered slightly when the light hit them. I needed to get him to the hospital, but moving someone with potential spinal injuries was dangerous. Still, leaving him here in the storm would be worse. The rain was coming down so hard now that I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. My hair was plastered to my head, and I could feel water running down my back, soaking through my bra and making me shiver despite the warm October night. This was the kind of storm that turned streets into rivers and made even experienced drivers pull over and wait it out. As I debated calling an ambulance, which could take 20 minutes or more in this weather, assuming they could even find us in this visibility, his eyes fluttered open. Dark brown, almost black, like looking into deep water at night. They focused on me with startling intensity for someone who'd just been unconscious, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. Those eyes were incredibly deep and intelligent, and somehow both vulnerable and dangerous at the same time. There were gold flecks scattered through the brown, like stars in a night sky, and laugh lines at the corners that suggested this was a man who smiled often. His eyelashes were ridiculously long and thick, the kind women paid good money to achieve with mascara and false lashes. "Angel," he murmured, his voice rough and accented with Italian undertones that made my name sound like poetry. Are you real?" The accent was subtle but unmistakable, not the thick, stereotypical Italian-American accent from movies, but something refined and educated, like he'd grown up bilingual in a household where both languages were spoken with equal fluency. It made even those few words sound melodic and warm despite his obvious pain. "I'm real," I said, leaning closer so he could hear me over the rain. "You've been in an accident. I'm a nurse. I'm going to help you." Up close, I could smell him despite the rain-expensive cologne with notes of bergamot and cedar, mixed with leather and something uniquely masculine that made my pulse quicken despite the circumstances. Even injured and soaked, he smelled like money and danger and something else I couldn't quite identify. Security maybe, or power. He tried to sit up, wincing in pain as the movement jarred his broken arm. "No hospitals. Can't. They'll find—" "You need medical attention," I said firmly, placing a gentle hand on his chest to keep him down. His heart was racing beneath my palm, and I could feel the solid muscle even through his soaked shirt. The man was built like a professional athlete, all hard planes and defined muscle that spoke of hours in the gym and physical work that went beyond casual exercise. "You have a head injury and your arm is broken." "Please," he said, and something in his voice made my chest tighten with an emotion I couldn't name. Desperation. Fear. This was clearly a man who wasn't used to asking for help, wasn't used to being vulnerable. And the fact that he was begging me, a complete stranger, spoke to how serious he thought his situation was. Just somewhere safe. The fear in his voice was what decided me. I'd heard that tone before, in the emergency room, from people who were running from something worse than their physical injuries. Domestic violence victims who were more afraid of going home than they were of their broken bones. People involved in things they couldn't talk about, who needed help but couldn't risk the official channels. Looking down at him, this stranger who crashed into my path like fate itself, I made a decision that would change everything. "Okay, my car is right there. Can you walk if I help you?" Relief flooded his features, transforming his face from merely handsome to absolutely devastating. "Thank you," he said, and the genuine gratitude in his voice made my heart skip a beat. Getting him to his feet was like lifting a mountain. He was easily 6'4", and every inch of him was solid muscle. Despite his injuries, he moved with a predatory grace that suggested this was a man accustomed to physical confrontation. He leaned heavily on me as we stumbled toward my old Honda, and I caught the full impact of his inexpensive cologne mixed with leather and rain, and something uniquely him that made me feel slightly dizzy. Even injured and soaked, he carried himself like someone important, someone accustomed to command. There was an authority in his bearing that had nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with confidence earned through experience. This was a man who was used to being in charge, used to having his orders followed without question. "What's your name?" I asked as I helped him into the passenger seat, trying to ignore the way my pulse spiked when his good hand brushed against my arm. He looked at me for a long moment, those dark eyes studying my face as if memorizing every detail. There was something almost tender in his gaze, like he was looking at something precious and unexpected. "Vincenzo," he said finally, his accent making the name sound like music. Vincenzo Torino. The name meant nothing to me then, but the way he said it suggested it should. There was weight to it, significance that I couldn't understand but could feel in the careful way he watched for my reaction. I wish I could go back to that moment of innocence, when he was just a hurt man who needed help, not the most dangerous person in Chicago. "I'm Sarah," I said, starting the car and cranking up the heat. "Sarah Romano." Something flickered across his features at my last name, surprise, maybe, or recognition. "Italian?" "My great-grandparents came over from Sicily in the 20s, I said, pulling back onto the road. "But I don't speak the language or anything. Just the name and my Nona's recipe for Sunday gravy." He smiled at that, a real smile that transformed his entire face and made him look younger, less dangerous. "Famiglia," he said softly. "Family." "It matters. I drove to Chicago General where I worked, my hand shaking on the steering wheel, though whether from the cold rain or the intense presence of the man beside me, I wasn't entirely sure. Vincenzo had passed out again, his head lolling against the window, and I kept glancing over to make sure he was still breathing. The hospital loomed ahead of us, all glass and steel and bright lights cutting through the storm like a beacon. The building was the tallest thing for blocks around, a testament to modern medicine and the determination to save lives regardless of the circumstances. It had been my second home for the past 5 years, the place where I'd learned to function on no sleep and too much caffeine, where I'd held hands with the dying and celebrated with the living, where I discovered that I was stronger and more capable than I'd ever imagined. "Almost there," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was reassuring him or myself. The emergency room was calmer now than it had been during my shift. Just the usual late-night crowd of insomniacs with mysterious pains, homeless people seeking shelter from the storm, and the occasional drunk who'd gotten belligerent and needed medical clearance before the police would book them. The fluorescent lights were harsh after the darkness of the storm, casting everything in sharp relief and making my eyes water slightly as they adjusted. I helped Vincenzo out of the car, his arm around my shoulders, my arm around his waist. He was conscious again but groggy, letting me guide him through the automatic doors that hissed open with a pneumatic sigh. He moved carefully, like someone who understood his own injuries and wasn't interested in making them worse. But there was still the underlying strength in the way he carried himself. "I need help here," I called to the triage nurse, Maria, who looked up from her computer with tired eyes that immediately sharpened when she saw us. Maria Gonzalez had been working emergency nursing for 15 years, and nothing much surprised her anymore. She was small and fierce, with graying hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun and intelligent brown eyes that missed nothing. She'd taken me under her wing when I started at Chicago General, teaching me the difference between textbook nursing and real-world emergency medicine. "What happened?" she asked, already reaching for a wheelchair and giving Vincenzo a professional once-over that took in his injuries, his expensive clothes, and his obvious discomfort with being in a medical facility. "Motorcycle accident. Had trauma, broken arm, possible internal injuries," I rattled off as we settled Vincenzo into the chair. "Found him about 20 minutes ago on Lakeshore Drive." Dr. Peterson emerged from one of the trauma bays, his salt and pepper hair disheveled from what had obviously been a long night. "Doctor." James Peterson was one of the best emergency physicians in the city, a man who'd seen everything the streets of Chicago could throw at him and still managed to maintain his compassion for his patients. He was tall and lean, with kind blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a bedside manner that could calm even the most panicked patients. "What do we have, Sarah?" he asked, pulling on fresh gloves as he approached. "John Doe, motorcycle accident, Vincenzo Torino." Vincenzo corrected, his voice stronger now despite his obvious pain. "My name is Vincenzo Torino." The effect was immediate and, terrifying. Dr. Peterson went white as a sheet and actually took a step back, his face draining of color like someone had pulled a plug. Maria's hands flew to her mouth, and I heard someone drop something in the distance. the sharp crash of metal hitting tile echoing through the suddenly silent emergency room. The change in atmosphere was palpable, like the air pressure had suddenly dropped. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People who had been moving purposefully suddenly found reasons to stand still, to listen, to watch what was happening with the kind of morbid fascination usually reserved for car accidents. Did he say? Dr. Peterson's voice was barely a whisper, like he was afraid to speak the name aloud. Torino, Maria confirmed, her voice shaking as she unconsciously took a step backward. The emergency room had gone silent except for the steady beep of monitors and the low hum of medical equipment. Everyone was staring at us, doctors, nurses, security guards. Even the janitor had stopped mopping and was backing away like Vincenzo might explode at any moment. The security guard's hand was hovering over his radio, but he looked more like he wanted to run than call for backup. It was like someone had announced that the Grim Reaper himself had just walked into our trauma bay, and everyone was suddenly remembering urgent business they had elsewhere. The fear was thick enough to cut with a scalpel, and I still had no idea what was causing it. "I don't understand," I said, looking between them all with growing confusion and a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. "What's wrong?" "He needs medical attention." "Doctor." Peterson cleared his throat, but his voice still came out strained and thin. "Sarah, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" I looked down at Vincenzo, who was watching everything with those dark eyes. Despite his injuries, there was something almost amused in his expression, as if he'd expected this reaction and wasn't particularly surprised by it. If anything, he looked resigned, like this was just another part of his life that he'd learned to accept. "Go," he said softly, his accent making the simple words sound gentle and reassuring. "I'll be fine for a moment." Dr. Peterson pulled me aside near the supply closet where we couldn't be overheard, his face grave and his hands shaking slightly. He kept glancing back toward Vincenzo like he expected the man to suddenly sprout fangs or burst into flames. "Sarah, do you have any idea who that man is?" "Vincenzo Torino. He was in a motorcycle accident and he's not just any patient." Dr. Peterson interrupted, running a hand through his gray hair. "Vincenzo Torino runs the Italian mob in Chicago. He controls everything from the docks to downtown. People disappear when they cross him. He's the most dangerous man in the city." The words hit me like ice water, making my stomach drop and my hands go cold. "That's impossible. He was hurt and I helped him." "Sarah, you don't understand." Dr. Peterson's voice was urgent now, like he was trying to make me comprehend the magnitude of what I'd done. "The Torino family has been running organized crime in the city for 3 generations. Vincenzo's grandfather started with protection rackets and bootlegging during Prohibition. His father expanded into gambling, loan sharking, and labor racketeering. Vincenzo took over when his father died 5 years ago, and since then his territory has doubled. The FBI has been trying to build a case against him for years." I felt dizzy, like the floor was shifting beneath my feet. But he was just lying there in the rain. "He called me an angel, because to him you probably are," Dr. Peterson said grimly. "Do you realize what you've done? You've seen him vulnerable. You know he was hurt. In his world, that kind of knowledge gets people killed." The implications of his words began to sink in, and I felt panic rising in my throat like bile. "He wouldn't hurt me," I said automatically, though I wasn't entirely sure why I was so certain. "He asked me not to bring him to a hospital. He was afraid. Men like Vincenzo Torino don't get afraid. Sarah, they get strategic." Dr. Peterson looked back toward where Vincenzo sat waiting, surrounded by nervous staff who were keeping their distance like he was radioactive. "The question is, what do we do now?" I followed his gaze. Vincenzo was sitting calmly in the wheelchair despite his injuries, somehow managing to look commanding even in his current state. There was something almost regal about the way he carried himself, like he was holding court rather than waiting for medical attention. When he caught me looking, he smiled, not the dangerous smile I would have expected from a mob boss, but something gentle and almost shy. "We treat him," I said firmly, drawing on every ounce of professional confidence I possessed. "He's a patient, and he needs medical care. Sarah, he's bleeding. Dr. Peterson, whatever else he might be, right now he's a man who needs help." I straightened my shoulders, calling on the strength that had gotten me through nursing school and 5 years in emergency medicine. "I'm going to do my job." Dr. Peterson looked like he wanted to argue. But after 15 years of working together, he knew that tone. When I made up my mind about something, especially when it came to patient care, I was immovable as a mountain. I walked back to Vincenzo, aware that every eye in the emergency room was on us. The silence was deafening except for the soft beep of monitors and the distant rumble of thunder outside. It felt like walking through a minefield where one wrong step could trigger an explosion. "How are you feeling?" I asked, checking the bandage I'd improvised for his head wound with hands that were steadier than I'd expected. "Better now that I know you're not afraid of me," he said quietly, his dark eyes studying my face. "Should I be?" He studied my face for a moment, those incredible eyes taking in every detail. "Most people are." "I'm not most people," I said, and was surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the chaos in my head. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe, or respect. There was a warmth in his eyes now that hadn't been there before, like I'd just passed some kind of test I hadn't known I was taking. "No," he said softly, and his voice was filled with something that sounded almost like wonder. "You're definitely not." Dr. Peterson approached reluctantly, flanked by two other doctors who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Doctor." Sarah Kim, one of our trauma specialists, kept glancing at Vincenzo like she was trying to memorize his face for a police lineup later. Dr. Martinez, usually one of our most confident residents, looked like he might pass out at any moment. Mr. Torino, Dr. Peterson said carefully, like he was defusing a bomb with words. "We'll need to do some tests. X-rays, a CT scan to check for brain injury. Whatever you need to do." Vincenzo said calmly, but then his eyes found mine. "Will you stay with me?" The question was simple, but the weight behind it was enormous. I could see something vulnerable in his expression, something almost desperate. This was a man who clearly didn't trust easily, didn't rely on others, and yet here he was asking me, a complete stranger, to stay by his side. I glanced at Dr. Peterson, who looked like he wanted to object strenuously. "My shift ended hours ago." "Please," Vincenzo said, and again I heard that note of vulnerability that seemed so at odds with everything I'd just learned about him. I donned single quotes, trust easily. "But you trust me?" "You saved my life," he said simply, and the honesty in his voice made my chest tight. "When you could have driven past, when you had every reason to leave me there. You stopped." The weight of his words settled over me like a blanket. He was right, I could have kept driving. Should have kept driving, according to every self-preservation instinct the first possessed. But something about seeing him lying there, broken and alone in the rain, had called to every protective instinct I had. "Okay," I said, making a decision that I sensed would change everything. "I'll stay." The next 2 hours passed in a surreal blur of medical procedures and whispered conversations. X-rays revealed 2 broken ribs and a fractured ulna, but thankfully no brain injury beyond a mild concussion. The medical staff worked efficiently but nervously, everyone clearly eager to finish and get as far away as possible. I stayed by Vincenzo's side through it all, and I began to notice things that didn't match the picture Dr. Peterson had painted. The way he said please and thank you to every person who helped him, even though they were all terrified. How he insisted on getting dressed again as soon as his arm was in a cast, not wanting to be vulnerable in a hospital gown. The careful way he moved, like someone accustomed to controlling every aspect of his environment but also deeply respectful of others. And the way he looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and something else I couldn't quite identify. Wonder, maybe? Like I was some kind of miracle he hadn't expected to encounter. During the CT scan, while we waited in the hallway, he told me about the motorcycle, a 1999 Ducati 996 that had belonged to his father. "He bought it the year I was born," he said, flexing his fingers in the new cast. "Said he was going to teach me to ride it when I got old enough." "Did he?" "No, he died when I was 17, before I was big enough to handle it properly." "I learned anyway." His smile was sad. "It was the only way I could feel close to him." "I'm sorry about your father." "Thank you." "What about your family?" "My parents died in a car accident when I was 22. "No siblings." I don't know why I told him. Maybe it was the pain medication making him more open, or maybe it was just the intimacy of the situation. But I found myself sharing things I rarely talked about. "I'm sorry too." "It's hard being alone. You get used to it. Do you?" He turned to look at me, and there was something intense in his gaze. "I never have. You have family though, right?" The business you mentioned, double quotes. His expression darkened slightly. I have employees, associates, people who depend on me and people I depend on. But family, He shook his head. Real family, people who care about you for who you are rather than what you can do for them. That's rare in my world. What world is that exactly? He was quiet for a long moment, and I thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, one where trust is a luxury most people can't afford. But you're trusting me. Yes, I am. Why? Because you saved my life without knowing who I was or what I could do for you. Because you're still here even after learning who I am. Because double quotes, he paused, searching for words. Because when I look at you, I see someone who makes choices based on what's right, not what's profitable. You should go home, he said as Dr. Peterson finished the last of the paperwork. It's late, and you must be exhausted. And I was exhausted, bone-deep tired in the way that only came from too many hours on my feet and too much emotional stress, but I was also strangely reluctant to leave. Something about this man, this situation, had gotten under my skin in a way I couldn't explain. How will you get home? I asked. You can't ride a motorcycle with a broken arm. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth, the first genuine amusement I'd seen from him all night. I'll manage. That's not an answer. You're very stubborn, aren't you? It's one of my better qualities, I said, and was surprised when he laughed a rich, warm sound that transformed his entire face and made him look years younger. I'm sure it is. He pulled out his phone with his good hand and dialed a number. Anthony, it's me. I need a pickup at Chicago General. A pause during which I could hear a deep voice responding rapidly in what sounded like Italian. Yes, I'm fine. Just bring the car. He hung up and looked at me. My driver will be here in 10 minutes. Driver, I repeated. Of course he had a driver. This was a man who probably hadn't driven himself anywhere in years, who lived in a world where personal transportation was handled by employees whose job it was to worry about traffic and parking while he conducted business from the back seat. Sarah, he said, and the way he said my name made my stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with hunger or nerves. What you did tonight, most people wouldn't have stopped, wouldn't have helped. Anyone would have, no, he said firmly, his dark eyes intense. They wouldn't, trust me on this. I know exactly how most people react to men like me, and compassion isn't usually part of the equation. Maybe they just need to get to know you better. Maybe, or maybe they're smarter than you are. Are you calling me stupid? I'm calling you brave. There's a difference. The distinction hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I was beginning to understand that I had wandered into something much larger and more dangerous than a simple motorcycle accident, but I couldn't bring myself to regret it. And now you know who I am, what I am, he continued. That puts you in a difficult position. Fear crept up my spine for the first time since this whole thing had started. Are you threatening me? The opposite. He reached out with his good hand and gently touched my arm. His fingers were warm even through the thin material of my scrubs, and I felt an electric shock at the contact that had nothing to do with static electricity. I'm trying to protect you. Knowledge about me, about my business, about tonight, it's dangerous. I'm not going to tell anyone anything, I said quickly. I just wanted to help. I know. His eyes were soft now, almost tender. But it's not that simple. There are people who would hurt you just for being here with me, who would use you to get to me. The implications of his words hit me like a physical blow. I had stumbled into something far beyond my understanding, and apparently my Good Samaritan act had painted a target on my back. What are you saying? I'm saying that helping me might have been the most dangerous thing you've ever done. His thumb traced across my wrist, and I shivered despite the warm hospital air. But I'm grateful you did it anyway. A black sedan pulled up outside, sleek and expensive looking. Even through the rain-streaked windows of the emergency room, I could see that this wasn't just any car, this was a vehicle that screamed money and importance. The paint job was flawless, the windows were tinted to perfect opacity, and it moved with the quiet confidence of German engineering. That's my ride, Vincenzo said, but he made no move to leave. Will I see you again? The question slipped out before I could stop it, and I immediately felt heat flood my cheeks. Here I was, asking about a second date with a man who had just told me that knowing him put my life in danger. Do you want to? He asked quietly, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that made my heart skip. The smart answer was no. The safe answer was no. The answer that any sane person would give was absolutely, definitely no. But looking into those dark eyes, remembering how gentle he'd been despite his pain, how polite he'd been to the staff despite their obvious fear, I found myself nodding. "Then you will," he said, standing slowly. Even injured, he moved with predatory grace, and I was reminded again of just how physically imposing he was. This was not a man anyone would want to cross. "But Sarah, be careful. The world I live in isn't kind to innocent people." "I'm not that innocent," I said, though my voice came out more breathless than I intended. He smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes and made my toes curl in my sensible nursing shoes. "No, I suppose you're not. You just saved a mob boss in the middle of a thunderstorm." He started toward the door, then turned back. "Sarah?" "Yeah? Thank you. For everything." And then he was gone, disappearing into the back of the sedan like he'd never been there at all. I stood there in the empty emergency room, surrounded by the normal sounds of late-night medicine, and wondered if I'd dreamed the entire thing. But my scrubs were still damp from the rain, and I could still smell his cologne on my skin where he'd leaned against me. Most importantly, I could still feel the warmth of his touch on my wrist, like a brand that marked me as somehow belonging to him. I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying every moment of the evening like a movie I couldn't turn off. The familiar streets of Chicago looked different, somehow darker, more mysterious, like I was seeing them through new eyes. My neighborhood, which had always felt safe and comfortable, now seemed somehow vulnerable in a way I'd never noticed before. My apartment building was a 3-story brownstone that had seen better days, but it was clean and affordable and only a 20-minute commute to the hospital. The hallways smelled like coffee and cooking spices, and my neighbors were a mix of nurses, teachers, and young professionals who couldn't afford anything fancier but were working their way up. My apartment was a studio on the 3rd floor, furnished with hand-me-downs from my parents' house and whatever I could afford on a nurse's salary. I'd always been proud of my independence, of making it on my own in a city like Chicago, but tonight it felt lonely in a way it never had before. I decorated with plants and books, trying to make the small space feel like home rather than just a place to sleep between shifts. The walls were covered with photos from nursing school, a few landscapes I'd picked up at street fairs, and a crucifix that had belonged to my grandmother. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I showered, washing the rain and hospital smell from my skin, but I couldn't wash away the memory of Vincenzo's eyes or the way he'd said my name like it was something precious. As I lay in bed listening to the storm finally fade, I wondered what I'd gotten myself into. Outside my window, Chicago sprawled in all directions. Millions of people living their lives, and somewhere out there was a man who had looked at me like I was an angel sent to save him. A man who was apparently one of the most dangerous people in the city, but who had said please and thank you like his mother had raised him right. I must have dozed off because I was startled awake by the sound of my phone ringing. The clock read 6 a.m., and for a moment I panicked, thinking it was the hospital calling me in for an emergency shift. We were always short-staffed, and it wouldn't be the first time they'd called me in early because someone had gotten sick or injured. But the number was unknown. "Hello?" I answered cautiously, still groggy from too little sleep. "Sarah." That voice, deep and slightly accented, sent an immediate shock of recognition through my system. "It's Vincenzo." My heart started racing like I'd just run a marathon. "How did you get my number?" "I have my ways," he said, and there was amusement in his voice. "Did I wake you?" "It's okay." "How are you feeling? How's your arm?" "Sore, but I've had worse." A pause. "I wanted to call and make sure you got home safely." The simple statement hit me with unexpected force. When was the last time anyone had worried about whether I made it home safely? "You were worried about me?" "I told you, Sarah. You're in my world now, whether you want to be or not. That means I look out for you." There was something possessive in the way he said it that should have scared me. Instead, it sent a warm feeling through my chest that I didn't want to examine too closely. When was the last time anyone had looked out for me? "I'm fine," I said, sitting up in bed and pulling my knees to my chest. "Just tired." "Good." Another pause. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay." "Do you regret helping me last night?" I thought about it for a moment. About the fear in Dr. Peterson's eyes, the way the entire emergency room had gone silent at the mention of his name. His warnings about dangerous knowledge and people who might want to hurt me. No, I said, and realized I meant it completely. I don't regret it. Even knowing who I am, what I do. I don't know what you do, I pointed out. I know what other people say you do. And what did they say? That you run the Italian mob in Chicago, that you're dangerous, that people disappear when they cross you. All true, he said matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. Are you trying to scare me? I'm trying to be honest with you. Something I'm not often in a position to do. The vulnerability in his admission made my chest ache. Why are you being honest with me? Because you saved my life. Because you stayed with me when everyone else was afraid. Because ... double quotes he trailed off. Because what? Because you looked at me like I was just a man who needed help, not a monster. The pain in his voice made me want to reach through the phone and hold him. You're not a monster, Vincenzo. You don't know that. Yes, I do. I was surprised by how certain I sounded. Monsters don't say please and thank you to terrified nurses. Monsters don't call to make sure someone got home safely. He was quiet for so long I thought the call had been dropped. Finally, he spoke, his voice rougher than before. I'd like to see you again, Sarah, to thank you properly for what you did. You already thanked me. Not properly. I could hear the smile in his voice. Let me take you to dinner. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? Because you're a mob boss, I thought, because you're dangerous. Because I'm already in way over my head and dinner would only make it worse. Because I've never felt this attracted to anyone in my life, and that terrifies me more than your reputation does. Because I don't have anything to wear to the kind of restaurants you probably go to, I said instead. He laughed, that warm, rich sound I was already becoming addicted to. We'll figure something out. Are you free tonight? I work until 7. Then 8 o'clock. I'll pick you up. Vincenzo, please, Sarah, let me do this. There was that word again, please. Spoken like a man who wasn't used to asking for things but was asking anyway. How was I supposed to say no to that? Okay, I heard myself say 8 o'clock. Good, and Sarah? Yeah? Don't worry about what to wear. You're perfect just as you are. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering what I'd just agreed to. A date with Vincenzo Torino? A date with the most dangerous man in Chicago. A date with the man who'd looked at me like I was an angel sent to save him. I should have been terrified. I should have been packing my bags and getting out of town. Instead, I was already trying to figure out what I was going to wear. The day passed in a blur of routine that felt anything but routine. Every time I checked on a patient, every time I administered medication, every time I did the 1,000 small tasks that made up a nursing shift, my mind drifted back to dark eyes and gentle hands. I found myself checking my phone more often than usual, not sure what I was expecting, but somehow disappointed when there were no new messages. Maria noticed immediately. Okay, Spill, she said during our lunch break, cornered me by the coffee machine that barely worked and somehow managed to make everything taste like burnt rubber. You've been floating on air all morning and you keep smiling at nothing. Who is he? Who's who? I asked innocently, stirring sugar into my coffee and trying to look casual. The guy's got you glowing like a Christmas tree. Come on, details. And don't even think about lying to me. I've known you for 5 years. And I've never seen you like this. Maria had been my first real friend at Chicago General, the one who'd show me where to find the good coffee and which doctors were worth flirting with for better patient assignments. She was 15 years older than me, divorced with 2 teenage daughters, and had the kind of wisdom that only came from hard experience. It's complicated, I said, which was the understatement of the century. Good complicated or bad complicated. I thought about that. What exactly was Vincenzo Torino? Good complicated because he made my pulse race and looked at me like I was something precious? Or bad complicated because he was apparently the head of organized crime in Chicago and knowing him might get me killed? I'm not sure yet. Well, whoever he is, he's got you looking happier than I've seen you in years. When do I get to meet him? Never if I had any sense. Meeting Maria would mean introducing her to Vincenzo's world, and I had a feeling that was the kind of introduction that could get people hurt. It's still new, I said carefully. We're taking things slow. Uh-huh. Maria gave me a knowing look that suggested she wasn't buying my casual act for a second. Just be careful, okay? You have a tendency to dive headfirst into things. I'm always careful. No, you're always cautious. There's a difference. Careful means you look before you leap. Cautious means you never leap at all. Her words stayed with me through the rest of my shift, echoing in my head as I went about my duties. Was I being careful or cautious? And which one was going to keep me safer in the long run? The emergency room was busier than usual for a weekday construction accident that brought in 3 workers with various injuries. An elderly woman who'd fallen and broken her hip, and the usual parade of people with ailments that probably didn't require emergency treatment but who had nowhere else to go. I was checking on the construction worker with a possible spinal injury when Dr. Peterson pulled me aside, his expression more serious than usual. "Sarah, about last night... What about it?" "I've been thinking about what happened about Torino." He glanced around to make sure we weren't being overheard. "I need to ask you, have you heard from him since then?" I thought about the phone call that morning, about Vincenzo's voice asking if I regretted helping him, about the dinner plans I'd somehow agreed to. Why? Because I'm worried about you. Men like that? They don't just disappear from your life once you've encountered them. You've seen him vulnerable, and that makes you either an asset or a liability. Either way, it's dangerous. "He's not going to hurt me," I said automatically. "How can you be so sure?" Because of the way he'd said please, like it physically hurt him to ask for help. Because he called to make sure I was safe. Because something in his eyes had been absolutely genuine when he'd looked at me. "I just am," I said instead, "Doctor." Peterson didn't look convinced, but he dropped the subject. Still, I could feel his worried gaze on me for the rest of the shift, and I knew he was probably right to be concerned. I was walking into something I didn't understand, with a man whose world operated by rules I couldn't even imagine. At exactly 7 o'clock, I clocked out and headed for the parking garage, my heart beating faster with every step. I was going to see Vincenzo again. The thought sent a thrill through me that was equal parts excitement and terror. But when I got to my car, I found I wasn't alone. A woman was waiting for me, elegant, older, with silver hair pulled back and a perfect chignon and kind brown eyes that reminded me somehow of my grandmother. She was dressed in expensive clothes that somehow managed to look both sophisticated and approachable, and she was holding a large garment bag and a smaller case. "Miss Sarah?" she asked in a soft Italian accent that made my name sound like music. "I'm Valentina. Mr. Vincenzo sent me." I stopped in my tracks, keys halfway to the car door. Where is he?" "Waiting in the car, cara mia." "But first, he thought you might like some help getting ready." She held up the garment bag and smiled. "He was not sure of your size, but he has good eyes for such things." I stared at her, then at the garment bag. "He sent you to dress me?" "To help you, if you wish it," Valentina said gently, and there was something maternal in her tone that made me relax slightly. "He knows this world is new to you. He does not want you to feel uncomfortable. I can't accept clothes from him." "It's too much." "Cara mia," Valentina said, stepping closer and looking at me with those kind, intelligent eyes. "You saved his life. This is not about money or obligation. This is about respect." She had a point, but accepting expensive gifts from a man I'd known for less than 24 hours felt like crossing a line I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Then again, everything about this situation was already so far outside my normal experience that maybe traditional rules didn't apply. "Would it help if I told you that he was more nervous about this dinner than I have seen him in 20 years? Valentina continued. "He wants very much to make a good impression." The thought of Vincenzo, Torino dangerous mob boss, being nervous about a dinner date with me was so incongruous that I almost laughed. "He's nervous." "Very. He's been pacing his office for 2 hours, changing clothes and asking my opinion about wine pairings." Valentina's smile was warm and conspiratorial. "I have not seen him care so much about anyone's opinions since he was a little boy trying to impress his mama. The image that conjured a young Vincenzo, seeking his mother's approval, was so tender and human that it made my chest ache. This was not the picture of a heartless criminal that everyone seemed to fear. "Okay," I heard myself say. "But if the dress doesn't fit or if I don't like it, we're going with what I have on." "Of course, cara mia. But I think you will like it very much." She led me back into the hospital to one of the family consultation rooms that was empty and private. The garment bag was unzipped with ceremonial care, revealing the most beautiful dress I'd ever seen in my life. It was deep blue silk, the exact color of the ocean at twilight, simple but elegant in a way that spoke of expensive taste and expert tailoring. The cut was classic and flattering, not too tight, not too revealing, but fitted in all the right places to suggest rather than display. It was the kind of dress that would make any woman feel beautiful and confident. "It's beautiful," I whispered, reaching out to touch the fabric. It was soft as water, luxurious in a way I'd never experienced. "Try it on," Valentina urged. "If it does not fit or you do not like it, we leave and you wear what you planned." The dress fit perfectly, of course it did. It hugged my curves in all the right places, made my skin look luminous, and somehow made me look sophisticated instead of just tired from a long shift. The smaller case contained shoes that matched perfectly, elegant but comfortable heels that would let me walk without feeling like I was going to topple over, along with a delicate silver necklace that caught the light beautifully. "How did he know my size?" I asked as Valentina fastened the necklace around my throat with practiced ease. "He pays attention," she said simply. "It is what has kept him alive all these years." The comment was casual, but it reminded me again of exactly who I was dealing with. This wasn't just a successful businessman who happened to notice details. This was a man whose survival depended on his ability to read people and situations with perfect accuracy. Valentina produced a small makeup kit and worked quickly, enhancing what I had rather than covering it up. Her touch was gentle and expert, and I found myself relaxing under her ministrations. When she was finished, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. I looked like I belonged in Vincenzo's world, whatever that world might be. "Perfect," Valentina said, nodding approvingly. "Now you are ready." "Valentina," I said as she packed up her things, "how long have you known him?" "Since he was a little boy," she said softly, and her expression became tender with memory. "I was his mother's closest friend, and when she died, I promised to look after him. He is a good man, cara mia. Complicated, yes. Dangerous, yes. But good. People are afraid of him, as they should be, when he's protecting what matters to him." She touched my cheek gently, the gesture so motherly that it brought tears to my eyes. "But you have nothing to fear from Vincenzo Torino. This I promise you." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I have watched him for 20 years, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looked when he spoke of you this morning. You are special to him, cara mia. More special than you know." The ride down to the street felt like walking to my execution, if executions involved beautiful dresses and butterflies in your stomach. The black sedan was waiting exactly where Valentina had said it would be, even more impressive in the early evening light than it had been at the hospital. The paint job was flawless, the chrome gleamed, and it sat at the curb like a predator at rest. The driver, Anthony, I assumed was a bear of a man in an expensive suit, but his eyes were kind when he nodded to me respectfully. He looked like he could bench press a small car, but his smile was genuine and warm. "Miss Sarah," he said, opening the rear door for me. "It's a pleasure to meet you." And then Vincenzo stepped out of the back seat, and I forgot how to breathe. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that had definitely been tailored specifically for him, bringing out the dark brown of his eyes and the olive tone of his skin. His broken arm was in a black sling that somehow only made him look more dangerous, like a wounded predator who was still perfectly capable of destroying anyone who threatened him. But when he saw me, his expression softened completely, and I saw something that looked almost like awe. "You look stunning," he said, his accent making the words sound like poetry. "Absolutely stunning." "The dress is beautiful," I said, suddenly shy under the intensity of his gaze. "But you didn't have to." "Yes, I did." He reached out with his good hand and touched the silver necklace at my throat, his fingers brushing against my skin and making me shiver. "You deserve beautiful things, Sarah." The simple statement hit me with unexpected force. When was the last time anyone had thought I deserved beautiful things? When was the last time anyone had cared enough to notice what would make me feel special? Anthony held the door open, and Vincenzo helped me into the back seat with old-fashioned courtesy that seemed natural rather than practiced. The interior of the car was all leather and wood, more luxurious than anything I'd ever experienced. It smelled like expensive cologne and leather and something uniquely masculine that made my head spin. "Where are we going?" I asked as we pulled away from the hospital. "Somewhere quiet," he said. "Where we can talk without interruption." "Not a restaurant?" "My house," he said, and when he saw my expression, he smiled. "Don't worry. Valentina is cooking, and she's the best chef in Chicago. You'll be perfectly safe." "I'm not worried about being safe," I said. though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. What are you worried about? I looked out the window at the city passing by, trying to organize my thoughts. Chicago looked different from inside this car, more beautiful, more mysterious, like I was seeing it through expensive glass that filtered out all the harsh edges. I don't understand why you're doing this, I said finally. Why you called, why you sent Valentina, why you want to have dinner with me. Don't you? I turned to look at him and found him studying me with those intense dark eyes. Tell me, because in 34 years, you're the first person who's seen me bleeding and broken and decided I was worth saving, he said quietly. Because you stayed with me when everyone else was afraid. Because you looked at me and saw a man instead of a monster. Vincenzo ... Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment I opened my eyes and saw you kneeling beside me in the rain. His honesty took my breath away. This was a man who probably never revealed his feelings to anyone, and here he was laying them out for me like an offering. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you either, I admitted. Something shifted in his expression, relief, maybe, or satisfaction. He reached over and took my hand, his thumb tracing over my knuckles in a way that sent electricity up my arm. Then I'm not the only one who felt it, he said. Felt what? The connection. The moment our eyes met, I knew my life had just changed forever. That's a little dramatic, don't you think? I'm Italian, he said with a smile. Everything is dramatic. Despite my nerves, I laughed. Is that your excuse for everything? It's worked so far. The car turned into a gated driveway that led through what looked like a small forest. Trees lined both sides of the road, their branches creating a canopy overhead that filtered the evening light into dappled patterns. It felt like entering another world, one where the rules of ordinary life didn't apply. And then I got my first glimpse of Vincenzo's house, and I understood immediately that I was completely out of my depth. It wasn't what I'd expected. Instead of some gaudy mansion designed to intimidate, it was a beautiful stone villa that looked like it had been transported directly from Tuscany. The architecture was classical Italian, all warm stone and elegant proportions, with gardens surrounding it that were perfectly manicured but somehow still looked natural. Warm light glowed from every window, and I could hear the sound of a fountain somewhere in the distance. It's beautiful, I said, and I meant it. The house was stunning, but it was also somehow welcoming, like it was designed to be a home rather than a fortress. My mother designed it, he said, and there was pride and sadness in his voice. She wanted something that felt like home. Italy? Sicily. My grandfather came here with nothing but the clothes on his back and a determination to build something better for his family. And did he? Vincenzo's expression darkened slightly. That depends on how you define better. There was a story there, layers of family history and complications that I could sense but not understand. This was a man carrying the weight of generations, living up to expectations and obligations that had been placed on him before he was old enough to choose for himself. Anthony opened the door for us, and Vincenzo helped me out of the car. Up close, the house was even more impressive, all stone and carved wood, with ivy climbing the walls and the scent of roses and lavender drifting from the gardens. It was the kind of place you saw in magazines, the kind of home that spoke of old money and careful taste. The front door opened before we reached it, revealing Valentina, now dressed in a simple black dress with her hair in a neat bun. She looked every inch the perfect housekeeper, but I could see the affection in her eyes when she looked at Vincenzo. "Welcome home," she said, kissing Vincenzo on both cheeks and smiling warmly at me. "Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. Perfect timing," Vincenzo said. "Sarah, would you like a tour?" The interior of the house was as beautiful as the exterior, high ceilings with exposed beams, stone floors covered with Persian rugs and artwork that probably cost more than I made in several years. But it felt like a home rather than a showplace, with family photos on the mantelpiece and books scattered on side tables. There were fresh flowers in every room, and the scent of whatever Valentina was cooking drifted from the kitchen. "Your family?" I asked, stopping in front of a collection of black and white photographs on the mantelpiece. "3 generations of Torino men," he said, pointing to various pictures. "My grandfather Francesco, my father Antonio, and my younger brother Marco." The photographs told a story of immigrant success and family pride. Francesco Torino had the weathered face of a man who'd worked with his hands, but his eyes were intelligent and determined. Antonio was more polished, wearing expensive suits and surrounded by the trappings of wealth, but he had the same strong jaw as his son, and Marco ... Marco looked like a younger version of Vincenzo, but there was something softer about his expression, something that suggested he'd been protected from the harder realities of the family business. Where's Marco now? Boston, Vincenzo said shortly, and I got the impression this wasn't a happy topic. He's pursuing his own interests. And your mother? His expression became tender, tinged with old grief. She died when I was 15, cancer. I'm sorry. Thank you. She would have liked you. How can you know that? Because she always said the world needed more people who helped others without expecting anything in return. We continued the tour through a library that made me weak in the knees floor-to-ceiling books in what looked like several languages. A rolling ladder that actually worked and comfortable reading chairs positioned near a massive fireplace. The collection was impressive not just for its size, but for its scope, everything from classical literature to modern business text to what looked like several volumes of poetry. You read poetry? I asked, running my fingers along the spine of a collection by Dante. My mother's influence, he said. She believed that beauty was just as important as strength, maybe more important. The kitchen was Valentina's obvious domain, all marble and copper with herbs growing in pots on the windowsill. The smells coming from the stove were incredible garlic and tomatoes and fresh basil, wine and meat and something sweet that might have been bread baking. It was the kind of kitchen that was clearly used for cooking rather than just for show, with wooden spoons worn smooth by use and copper pots that bore the patina of years. Mr. Vincenzo, take the young lady to the terrace, Valentina said, shooing us away from her cooking with a wooden spoon. The sunset will be beautiful tonight and the air will do you both good. The terrace overlooked a garden that could have been featured in a magazine, roses and lavender arranged in careful patterns. A small vineyard with neat rows of grapevines, and beyond that, a view of Lake Michigan that took my breath away. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that reflected off the water like a painting. This is incredible, I said, leaning against the stone railing and breathing in the scent of roses and lake air. It's peaceful, Vincenzo said, standing beside me close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. When I was younger, I thought I wanted to live in the heart of the city, to be where the action was. Now I prefer the quiet. Do you come out here often? Every morning with my coffee. It helps me think. I could imagine him standing here in the early morning light, watching the sunrise over the lake while he planned whatever mysterious business occupied his days. The thought should have unsettled me after all. That business probably involved things I didn't want to know about, but instead I found it oddly comforting. There was something very human about the image of him drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. Sarah, he said, turning to face me. I want you to know that whatever happens between us, you have nothing to fear from me or my world. I will make sure of that. What if I don't want protection? I asked. What if I want to understand? Understanding and safety aren't mutually exclusive, aren't they? If I really understood your world, would I still be safe? He studied my face for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his words carefully. You're not what I expected. What did you expected? Fear. Questions about getting out, about staying away from me. Maybe I should be asking those questions. Maybe you should. He reached up and touched my face, his thumb tracing along my cheekbone with infinite gentleness. But I'm selfish enough to hope you don't. The honesty in his voice undid me completely. Here was a man who could probably have anything he wanted, anyone he wanted, and he was asking plain, ordinary Sarah from a third-floor walk-up to stay. I'm scared, I admitted. Of me? Of how much I want to stay. Something hot and intense flashed in his eyes, and for a moment I thought he might kiss me. Instead, he stepped back, his hand dropping to his side, and I could see him exercising the kind of self-control that probably made him dangerous in business. Dinner should be ready, he said, his voice rougher than before. Valentina had outdone herself. The dining room was intimate and elegant, with candles and fresh flowers creating a romantic atmosphere that made my pulse quicken. She served course after course of the most incredible Italian food I'd ever tasted, antipasti with prosciutto and fresh mozzarella, pasta with a sauce that tasted like it had been simmering for hours, wine that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But it wasn't just the food that made the evening special. It was Vincenzo himself telling me stories about growing up in this house, About his mother's garden and his father's wine cellar, about learning to cook from Valentina when he was barely tall enough to reach the stove. For a while, I could almost forget who he was supposed to be. He was just a man sharing dinner with a woman he was interested in, charming and funny and surprisingly vulnerable. My mother used to say that food was love made visible, he said as Valentina served what might have been the best tiramisu in the history of the world. She spent hours in the kitchen, not because she had to, but because she wanted to take care of people. Is that where you learn to take care of people too? Maybe, though my methods are probably different from hers. There was an edge to that comment that reminded me of who I was dining with, but somehow it didn't scare me as much as it should have. There are different ways of taking care of people, and maybe some of them required a harder touch than others. You're thinking very hard about something, he said, refilling my wine glass with careful attention. Just trying to reconcile the man telling me about learning to make pasta with the man everyone's afraid of. They're the same man, he said simply. I've never pretended to be anything other than what I am. And what are you? Dangerous when I need to be. Protective of the people I care about. Loyal to those who deserve it and ruthless with those who don't. Where do I fit in that? You're someone I care about. The simple statement hit me like a physical blow. You barely know me. I know enough, he said, leaning forward slightly. I know you're brave enough to help a stranger in a storm. I know you're compassionate enough to stay with someone everyone else fears. I know you're strong enough to handle the truth about who I am. How can you be so sure? Because you're still here. He was right. Despite everything, the warnings, the fear in everyone's eyes at the hospital, the obvious danger, I was still here. Still drawn to him like a moth to flame, even knowing I might get burned. What happens now? I asked. That's up to you, he said. I told you, Sarah. You're in my world now whether you want to be or not. But you get to choose how deep you go. And if I choose to go deeper, then I'll show you everything. The good and the bad, the beautiful and the ugly. And I'll protect you from the parts that could hurt you. And if I choose to stay shallow, then I'll respect that. But I won't pretend I don't want more. The intensity in his voice made my pulse race. What do you want? Everything, he said without hesitation. I want to know what makes you laugh, what makes you cry, what you dream about when you can't sleep. I want to watch you save people at the hospital and come home to me afterward. I want to wake up next to you and know that you chose to be there. Vincenzo ... double quotes. I want you to be mine. Sarah, completely and irrevocably mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have scared me. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in my belly and made me wonder what it would feel like to belong to someone like him, to be claimed and protected and treasured by a man who could destroy anyone who tried to hurt me. I need time, I said finally. Of course you do. He reached across the table and took my hand. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. We have all the time you need. How can you be so patient? You don't seem like a patient man. I'm patient when something matters. And you, Sarah Romano, matter more than you know. The way he said my full name, like he'd been thinking about it, made me shiver. How do you know my last name? I told you I pay attention. He smiled. Sarah Romano, 27 years old, graduated from Rush University with a nursing degree. Works in emergency medicine at Chicago General. Lives alone, no family in the area, volunteers at the animal shelter on weekends. You had me investigated, I said, though I wasn't as upset as I should have been. In his world, it probably made perfect sense to know everything about someone before getting involved with them. I had to know if you were a threat. And you're the opposite of a threat. He seemed to struggle for words. You're everything good I didn't know I was looking for. The drive back to my apartment was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I kept stealing glances at him, trying to memorize the sharp line of his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the elegant length of his fingers where they rested on his knee. This felt like a turning point, like whatever happened next would determine the direction of my entire life. When we pulled up in front of my building, he walked me to the door despite my protests that he didn't need to, though Anthony followed at a discreet distance. And I noticed him scanning the street like he was looking for threats. Even here, in my safe little neighborhood, Vincenzo lived in a world where danger could come from anywhere. Thank you for tonight, I said, suddenly awkward on my own doorstep. For dinner, for the dress, for what? For showing me that you're more than what people say you are. I'm exactly what people say I am. he said seriously. But I'm also more than that. I hope tonight helped you see both sides. It did. We stood there for a moment, the space between us charged with unspoken possibilities. I wanted him to kiss me, wanted it with an intensity that surprised me, but I could see him holding himself back. Can I see you again? He asked. When? Tomorrow. The day after? Every day if you'll let me. Vincenzo ... double quotes. I know it's too much, too fast. But I've waited my entire life to feel this way about someone, and now that I have ... double quotes, he shook his head. I don't want to waste any time. I work tomorrow. Then I'll pick you up after work. And the day after? Whatever you want. Dinner, a movie, a quiet evening at home. I just want to be with you. Looking up at him in the soft glow of the streetlight, I realized I was already lost. Whatever danger came with caring about Vincenzo Torino, it was too late to protect myself from it now. Okay, I said. Pick me up tomorrow. The smile that spread across his face was radiant, transforming him from dangerous mob boss to just a man who was happy to spend time with a woman he cared about. Good night, Sarah, he said, lifting my hand to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to my knuckles. Good night. I watched him walk back to the car, noting the careful way he moved, the alertness in his posture even when he was relaxed. Anthony held the door for him, and just before he got in, Vincenzo looked back at me and smiled. The car disappeared into the night, leaving me alone on the sidewalk with the phantom warmth of his lips on my skin and the knowledge that my life had just changed in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. I climbed the 3 flights to my apartment, the beautiful dress rustling around my legs, the silver necklace warm against my throat. In my bathroom mirror, I looked like a stranger, sophisticated, elegant, like someone who belonged in Vincenzo's world. But underneath the beautiful clothes and perfect makeup, I was still just Sarah, still a nurse who worked too many hours and worried about paying rent. Still someone who had never imagined she would catch the attention of a man like Vincenzo Torino. As I got ready for bed, carefully hanging up the dress and placing the necklace in my jewelry box like they were precious treasures, I tried to process everything that had happened. 2 days ago, I'd been living a quiet, predictable life. Now I was being courted by the most dangerous man in Chicago, and the terrifying part was how right it felt. I fell asleep thinking about dark eyes and gentle hands, about the way he'd said my name like it was something precious, about the promise in his voice when he said he'd protect me from anything that tried to hurt me. I had no idea that protection would be tested much sooner than either of us expected. The next morning brought reality crashing back. I woke up to my alarm at 6 a.m., the beautiful evening already feeling like a dream. But when I opened my closet, there was the blue dress hanging next to my scrubs, proof that it had all been real. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a woman who looked exactly the same as, always blonde hair that needed coffee before it would cooperate, blue eyes that were still puffy from sleep, the kind of pale skin that showed every emotion. But something was different. There was a glow in my cheeks, a light in my eyes that hadn't been there before. I looked like a woman who was falling in love. The thought stopped me cold. Was that what this was? Love? After 2 days? But as I got ready for work, going through the familiar routine of shower and coffee and checking my bag for everything I need during the shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. It wasn't just attraction, though God knew Vincenzo was the most attractive man I'd ever encountered. It wasn't just excitement, though the danger and mystery of his world was intoxicating. It was something deeper, something that felt like recognition. Like I'd been waiting my whole life to meet him without even knowing it. Work was busy, it always was, but I found myself distracted in a way that was completely unlike me. Usually, when I was at the hospital, everything else faded away. The job required total focus, complete attention to detail, because people's lives literally depended on it. But today, I caught my mind wandering at the strangest moments. I'd be checking a patient's blood pressure and suddenly remember the way Vincenzo had looked at me when I walked down the stairs in that blue dress. I'd be administering medication and find myself thinking about his hands, about the contrast between their obvious strength and the gentleness with which he touched my face. Maria noticed immediately. Okay, seriously, she said, cornering me during a rare quiet moment. You're completely distracted today. Either tell me what's going on or I'm staging an intervention. Nothing's going on, I said automatically. That's why you just tried to put Mrs. Patterson's IV in her ankle. I looked down at my hands, realizing she was right. I'd been so lost in thought that I completely misidentified the injection site. That was the kind of mistake that could hurt someone, and I never made mistakes like that. I went on a date last night, I said finally. And it was incredible. Good incredible or scary incredible? I thought about that. Both. Want to talk about it? More than anything, I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to tell someone about the most amazing evening of my life, about the man who looked at me like I was precious, about the way he made me feel like the most important person in the world. But how could I explain that the man in question was Vincenzo Torino without sending Maria into a panic? It's complicated, I said instead. You keep saying that. Complicated how? He's not what I usually go for. Thank God for that. Your usual type is emotionally unavailable resident doctors with commitment issues. She had a point. My dating history was a string of relationships with men who were either too busy to make time for me or too damaged to let me get close. Safe men, maybe, but men who had never made me feel the way Vincenzo did with just a look. This one's different. Different how? He makes me feel like I matter. Maria's expression softened. Honey, you do matter. I know, but he makes me feel like I matter to him. Like he's been waiting his whole life to meet me. That's either really romantic or really creepy, depending on the guy. It's romantic, I said, and I was surprised by how certain I sounded. When do I get to meet him? Soon, I lied. Maybe. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of routine medical emergencies and paperwork. A teenager who'd broken his arm skateboarding, an elderly man with chest pains that turned out to be indigestion, a woman in labor who didn't quite make it to the maternity ward. Normal things, everyday tragedies, and triumphs that usually absorbed all my attention. But today, I kept checking my phone. At exactly 7 o'clock, I clocked out and headed for the parking garage, my heart beating faster with every step. I was going to see Vincenzo again. The thought sent a thrill through me that was equal parts excitement and terror. But when I got to my car, I found I wasn't alone again. This time, it wasn't Valentina waiting for me. This time, it was Vincenzo himself, leaning against the hood of his black sedan like he owned the world. He was wearing another perfectly tailored suit. This one charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe, and even with his arms still in a sling, he looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a magazine. How was your day? He asked, like this was normal, like he picked me up from work every day. Busy, yours? Productive? He squeezed my hand. How's your patient from yesterday? For a moment I was confused, then remembered the heart attack case that had kept us late. The fact that he remembered that he'd thought to ask made my chest feel warm. Stable, he's going home tomorrow. Good. His smile was soft. You save people, Sarah. Every day you make the world a little better. It's just my job. No, it's who you are. The job is just how you express it. I looked at our joined hands, his so much larger than mine, scarred across the knuckles in a way that suggested he'd used them for violence, but holding mine with infinite gentleness. Where are we going tonight? I asked. My office, he said. I thought you might like to see where I work. Your office? You said you wanted to understand my world. This is part of it. The building was downtown, all glass and steel, and expensive landscaping that suggested serious money. The Torino name was etched discreetly on a plaque near the entrance, no flashy signs or obvious advertising, just quiet wealth and understated power. The lobby looked like something from a luxury hotel with marble floors that probably cost more than most people made in a year, crystal chandeliers that threw prismatic light across the ceiling, and artwork that belonged in a museum. Shipping and logistics, Vincenzo explained as we rode the elevator to the top floor. Legitimate business mostly? Mostly? Some of our clients prefer discretion in their transportation needs. That's a very polite way of saying smuggling. I prefer alternative import solutions. Despite everything, I laughed. You're terrible. But charming, right? Unfortunately, yes. The elevator opened directly into his office suite, and I understood immediately why he'd brought me here. This was his domain, the place where he commanded an empire, and he was sharing it with me. The main office was stunning floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, giving a view of Chicago that stretched all the way to the lake. His desk was massive, carved from what looked like a single piece of dark wood and positioned to command the room. There were seating areas that managed to be both elegant and comfortable, and art on the walls that spoke of expensive taste and cultural sophistication. But what caught my attention were the details that made it personal. family photos on the credenza, books and what looked like Italian on the shelves, a chess set that was clearly used rather than decorative. "It's beautiful," I said. "My father's desk," he said, running his hand over the polished wood with something like reverence. "His father's before that. Someday it'll belong to my son. Do you want children?" "I never did before," he said quietly, turning to look at me with an intensity that made my knees weak. "Now, double quotes," he paused. "Now I can imagine it." The implication hung in the air between us, heavy with possibility and promise. I could picture it, two dark-haired children with his eyes and his smile, this office passing to another generation, the Torino name continuing. "Sarah," he said, and something in his voice made me turn to face him fully. "Yeah? I need to tell you something. About why I brought you here tonight." "Okay." He moved to the windows, looking out at the city lights, and I could see tension in the line of his shoulders. When Vincenzo was tense, I was beginning to realize it usually meant trouble. "There's been a development. Someone took notice of our dinner last night." Fear crept up my spine like ice water. "What kind of notice?" "Pictures. Of us together, of you in the dress I bought you. They're asking questions about who you are, what you mean to me." "Who's they?" "My enemies. People who would use you to hurt me if they thought you mattered to me." "And do I? Matter to you?" He turned around and the look in his eyes made my breath catch. There was something fierce and possessive there, something that spoke of depths I was only beginning to understand. More than I've ever let anyone matter before. Which is why we have a problem. What kind of problem? The kind that gets innocent people hurt. He came back to me, taking my hands in his with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the tension in his voice. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. Last night was perfect, but it was also dangerous. By being seen with me, by letting me court you publicly, you've painted a target on your back. So, what are you saying? That we can't see each other?" "I'm saying we need to be smarter about it, more careful." "How careful? How careful?" "You'll have protection. Round the clock, discreet but effective. Your apartment will be secured, your route to work will be monitored, and you'll have a panic button that connects directly to me. You want to put me under surveillance." "I want to keep you alive," he said fiercely, and I could see something almost desperate in his eyes. "These aren't people who play by rules. Sarah, they'll hurt you just to watch me bleed." The reality of what he was saying hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about dating someone dangerous, this was about becoming a target myself, about living in a world where my safety depended on constant vigilance and armed guards. "Maybe we should ... I started, then stopped. "Should what?" "Maybe we should slow down. Take a step back until things cool off." Something dark flashed in his eyes, something that might have been pain or fury or both. "Is that what you want?" "I want you to be safe. I want me to be safe. And I want both of those things too." "But Sarah, they already know about you." "Stepping back now won't make you less of a target, it'll just make you an unprotected target. So I'm trapped. You're protected. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because it sounds like my life just stopped being my own." He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentler. "Your life is still your own. But now it's also precious to me, which means I'll do whatever it takes to keep it safe." Looking at him, I could see the war going on behind his eyes, the desire to keep me close fighting with the knowledge that caring about me put me in danger. "Show me?" I said suddenly. "Show you what?" "The protection. The surveillance. All of it. If this is going to be my life now, I want to understand what that means." Something like relief crossed his face. "You're not running." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "But I'm not running. Good, because I don't think I could let you go now, even if you wanted me to." The motorcycle was twisted around a lamppost, steam rising from its engine like a dying breath. The man lay motionless on the rain-soaked pavement, dark hair plastered to his skull, blood mixing with the water that pooled around his head. My nursing instincts kicked in before my common sense could protest. I pulled over, hazard lights flashing, and ran toward him. He was massive, even unconscious and broken. I could see the powerful build beneath his leather jacket. His face was carved from marble, all sharp angles and strong lines, with a jaw that could cut glass. There was something almost ethereal about him lying there in the rain, like a fallen angel cast down from heaven. I knelt beside him, my knees immediately soaked through. His pulse was weak but steady, breathing shallow. A head wound was bleeding freely, and I could see his left arm was definitely broken. But he was alive, barely. Can you hear me? I whispered, checking his pupils with my phone's flashlight. No response. I needed to get him to the hospital, but moving someone with potential spinal injuries was dangerous. Still, leaving him here in this storm would be worse. As I debated calling an ambulance, which could take 20 minutes in this weather, his eyes fluttered open. Dark brown, almost black, like looking into deep water at night. They focused on me with startling intensity, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. Angel, he murmured, his voice rough and accented with Italian undertones. Are you ... are you real? I'm real, I said, leaning closer so he could hear me over the rain. You've been in an accident. I'm a nurse. I'm going to help you. He tried to sit up, wincing in pain. No hospitals. Can't. They'll find ... double quotes. You need medical attention. I said firmly, placing a gentle hand on his chest to keep him down. His heart was racing beneath my palm, and I could feel the solid muscle even through his soaked shirt. You have a head injury and your arm is broken. Please, he said, and something in his voice made my chest tighten. Desperation, fear. This was a man who clearly wasn't used to asking for help. Just somewhere safe. Looking down at him, this stranger who crashed into my path like fate itself, I made a decision that would change everything. Okay, my car is right there. Can you walk if I help you? Getting him to his feet was like lifting a mountain. He was easily 6'4", and every inch of him was solid muscle. He leaned heavily on me as we stumbled toward my old Honda, and I caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with leather and rain. Even injured and soaked, he smelled like money and danger. What's your name? I asked as I helped him into the passenger seat. He looked at me for a long moment, those dark eyes studying my face as if memorizing every detail. Vincenzo, he said finally. Vincenzo Torino. The name meant nothing to me then. I wish I could go back to that moment of innocence when he was just a hurt man who needed help, not the most dangerous person in Chicago. I drove to Chicago General, where I worked, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Vincenzo had passed out again, his head lolling against the window, and I kept glancing over to make sure he was still breathing. The hospital loomed ahead of us, all glass and steel and bright lights cutting through the storm. Almost there, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was reassuring him or myself. The emergency room was calmer now, just the usual late-night crowd of insomniacs and people with nowhere else to go. I helped Vincenzo out of the car, his arm around my shoulders, my arm around his waist. He was conscious again but groggy, letting me guide him through the automatic doors. I need help here. I called to the triage nurse, Maria, who looked up from her computer with tired eyes. What happened? She asked, already reaching for a wheelchair. Motorcycle accident. Head trauma, broken arm, possible internal injuries. I rattled off as we settled Vincenzo into the chair. Found him about 20 minutes ago. Dr. Peterson emerged from one of the trauma bays, his salt and pepper hair disheveled from a long night. What do we have, Sarah? John Doe, motorcycle accident, Vincenzo Torino, Vincenzo corrected, his voice stronger now. My name is Vincenzo Torino. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Dr. Peterson went white as a sheet and actually took a step back. Maria's hands flew to her mouth, and I heard someone drop something in the distance, the sharp crash of metal hitting tile. Did he say? Dr. Peterson's voice was barely a whisper. Torino, Maria confirmed, her voice shaking. The emergency room had gone silent. Everyone was staring at us, doctors, nurses, even the janitor had stopped mopping and was backing away. The security guard had his hand on his radio, but he looked more like he wanted to run than call for backup. I don't understand, I said, looking between them all. What's wrong? He needs medical attention. Dr. Peterson cleared his throat, but his voice still came out strained. Sarah, could I speak with you privately for a moment? I looked down at Vincenzo, who was watching everything with those dark eyes. Despite his injuries, there was something almost amused in his expression, as if he'd expected this reaction. Go, he said softly. I'll be fine for a moment. Dr. Peterson pulled me aside near the supply closet where we couldn't be overheard. His face was grave and his hands were shaking slightly. Sarah, do you have any idea who that man is? Vincenzo Torino? He was in a motorcycle accident and he's not just any patient, Dr. Peterson interrupted. Vincenzo Torino runs the Italian mob in Chicago. He controls everything from the docks to downtown. People disappear when they cross him. He's the most dangerous man in the city. The words hit me like ice water. That's impossible. He was hurt and I helped him. Sarah, you don't understand. The Torino family has been running organized crime in this city for 3 generations. Vincenzo took over when his father died 5 years ago, and since then, his territory has doubled. The FBI has been trying to build a case against him for years. I felt dizzy. But he was just lying there in the rain. He called me an angel. Because to him, you probably are, Dr. Peterson said grimly. Do you realize what you've done? You've seen him vulnerable. You know he was hurt. In his world, that kind of knowledge gets people killed. He wouldn't hurt me, I said automatically, though I wasn't sure why I was so certain. He asked me not to bring him to a hospital. He was afraid. Men like Vincenzo Torino don't get afraid. Sarah, they get strategic. Dr. Peterson looked back toward where Vincenzo sat waiting, surrounded by nervous staff who were keeping their distance. The question is, what do we do now? I followed his gaze. Vincenzo was sitting calmly in the wheelchair despite his injuries, somehow managing to look commanding even in his current state. When he caught me looking, he smiled not the dangerous smile I would have expected from a mob boss, but something gentle and almost shy. We treat him, I said firmly. He's a patient and he needs medical care. Sarah, he's bleeding. Dr. Peterson, whatever else he might be, right now he's a man who needs help. I straightened my shoulders, drawing on the confidence that had gotten me through nursing school and 5 years in emergency medicine. I'm going to do my job. I walked back to Vincenzo, aware that every eye in the emergency room was on us. The silence was deafening except for the soft beep of monitors and the distant rumble of thunder outside. How are you feeling? I asked, checking the bandage I'd improvised for his head wound. Better now that I know you're not afraid of me, he said quietly. Should I be? He studied my face for a moment. Most people are. I'm not most people, I said, and was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe, or respect. No, he said softly. You're definitely not. Dr. Peterson approached reluctantly, flanked by 2 other doctors who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. ... Torino, he said carefully. We'll need to do some tests. X-rays, a CT scan to check for brain injury. Whatever you need to do, Vincenzo said. Then he looked at me. Will you stay with me? I glanced at Dr. Peterson, who looked like he wanted to object. My shift ended hours ago. Please, Vincenzo said, and again I heard that note of vulnerability that seemed so at odds with his reputation. I don single quotes T ... I don't trust easily. But you trust me? You saved my life, he said simply. When you could have driven past. When you had every reason to leave me there. You stopped? The weight of his words settled over me. He was right, I could have kept driving. Should have kept driving. But something about seeing him lying there, broken and alone in the rain, had called to every protective instinct I had. Okay, I said. I'll stay. The next 2 hours passed in a surreal blur. X-rays revealed 2 broken ribs and a fractured ulna, but thankfully no brain injury beyond a mild concussion. The medical staff worked efficiently but nervously, everyone clearly eager to finish and get as far away as possible. I stayed by Vincenzo's side through it all, and I began to notice things. The way he said please and thank you to every person who helped him, even though they were all terrified. How he insisted on getting dressed again as soon as his arm was in a cast, not wanting to be vulnerable in a hospital gown. The careful way he moved, like someone accustomed to controlling every aspect of his environment. And the way he looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and something else I couldn't quite identify. Wonder, maybe. You should go home, he said as Dr. Peterson finished the last of the paperwork. It's late and you must be exhausted. How will you get home? I asked. You can't ride a motorcycle with a broken arm. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. I'll manage. That's not an answer. You're very stubborn, aren't you? It's one of my better qualities, I said, and was surprised when he laughed, a rich, warm sound that transformed his entire face. I'm sure it is. He pulled out his phone with his good hand and dialed a number. Anthony, it's me. I need a pickup at Chicago General. A pause. Yes, I'm fine. Just bring the car. He hung up and looked at me. My driver will be here in 10 minutes. Driver, I repeated. Of course you have a driver. Sarah, he said, and the way he said my name made my stomach flutter. What you did tonight. Most people wouldn't have stopped. Wouldn't have helped. Anyone would have. No, he said firmly. They wouldn't, and now you know who I am, what I am. That puts you in a difficult position. Fear crept up my spine. Are you threatening me? The opposite. He reached out with his good hand and gently touched my arm. His fingers were warm, and I felt an electric shock at the contact. I'm trying to protect you. Knowledge about me, about my business, about tonight, it's dangerous. I'm not going to tell anyone anything, I said quickly. I just ... I just wanted to help. I know. His eyes were soft now, almost tender. But it's not that simple. There are people who would hurt you just for being here with me. Who would use you to get to me? The implications of his words hit me like a physical blow. What are you saying? I'm saying that helping me might have been the most dangerous thing you've ever done. His thumb traced across my wrist, and I shivered. But I'm grateful you did it anyway. A black sedan pulled up outside, sleek and expensive. Through the tinted windows, I could see the outline of a large man in the driver's seat. That's my ride, Vincenzo said, but he made no move to leave. Will I see you again? The question slipped out before I could stop it, and I immediately felt heat flood my cheeks. Do you want to? He asked quietly. The smart answer was no. The safe answer was no. But looking into those dark eyes, remembering how gentle he'd been despite his pain, how polite he'd been to the staff despite their fear, I found myself nodding. Then you will, he said, standing slowly. Even injured, he moved with predatory grace, and I was reminded again of how physically imposing he was. But Sarah ... Be careful. The world I live in isn't kind to innocent people. I'm not that innocent, I said, though my voice came out more breathless than I intended. He smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes. No, I suppose you're not. You just saved a mob boss in the middle of a thunderstorm. You're mine. 3 months later, I woke up in Vincenzo's bed, our bed, to the sound of him speaking quietly on the phone in rapid Italian. It was early, barely dawn, but I could see him on the balcony through the French doors, already dressed in his suit despite the hour. When he came back inside, he found me sitting up in bed, wearing one of his shirts and watching him with sleepy eyes. Business emergency? I asked. Nothing that can't wait, he said, sitting on the edge of the bed and leaning down to kiss me. Good morning, beautiful. Good morning. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about something. What? Instead of answering, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart stopped. Vincenzo ... double quotes. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other for 3 months. But I also know that I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life. He opened the box, revealing a ring that was absolutely perfect, a classic solitaire diamond that caught the early morning light and threw it back in brilliant sparkles. Sarah Romano, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Will you marry me? Yes, I said without hesitation. Yes, of course, yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger and it fit perfectly because of course he'd somehow figured out my ring size without me noticing. I love you, he said, pulling me into his arms. I love you too. So much. We'll have the wedding here in the garden. Valentina's already planning the menu. She knows? She's known I was going to propose since our second date. She said she could see it in the way I looked at you. And how do you look at me? Like you're my whole world. Because you are. We lay there in the early morning light, planning our future together. He told me about the honeymoon he wanted to take me on 2 weeks in Sicily, visiting his family's ancestral home. I told him about the nursing program I wanted to start at the hospital, using his connections and resources to help underserved communities. We'll make quite a team, he said. The mob boss and the nurse? The man and woman who love each other enough to move mountains. 6 months later, we stood in his garden, our garden surrounded by friends and family, saying vows that promised forever. I wore my grandmother's wedding dress, which Valentina had somehow tracked down and had perfectly altered. Vincenzo wore a traditional Italian suit and cried when he saw me walking down the aisle. Anthony served as best man, beaming with pride. Maria was my maid of honor, still slightly stunned that her friend had fallen in love with Chicago's most eligible bachelor, though she Still don't know the whole truth about his business. In my wedding vows, I promised to love him completely, to stand by him through everything, to be his safe harbor in a dangerous world. In his, he promised to protect me always, to love me fiercely, to give me everything I could ever want or need. You saved me, he whispered as we danced our first dance as husband and wife. In that rain, in that hospital, every day since you saved me, we saved each other, I said. And we had. He'd given me a life I never dreamed possible, luxury and excitement, and a love so deep it took my breath away. I'd given him something he'd never thought he could have: unconditional acceptance. A safe place to be vulnerable, someone who saw the man he was beneath everything else. It wasn't the life I planned. It was better. As we swayed together in the garden, surrounded by twinkling lights and the scent of roses, I thought about that night 3 months ago when I'd stopped to help a stranger in the rain. I thought I was saving his life, but really we'd saved each other. And this beautiful, complicated, passionate life we built together, this was just the beginning.